Welcome into the EMA Online podcast. Mason Voth, Alec Bussey here with you from EMA Online as we get ready to go on this Friday. You'll be hearing it in the afternoon because it will be out in the afternoon. We're just doing this after 11 o'clock where we're getting set for the Wildcats and the Cowboys, part 2 on Saturday. K-State got their first sweep of the season against Baylor on Tuesday. They get the opportunity for their second sweep coming up this weekend. And it'd be pretty significant for the Wildcats to go out and be able to get the job done against Oklahoma State. They are a team that are playing better than they were when they came to Manhattan. They're at full strength now as opposed to when they were in Manhattan. But the one thing that is going against them is that they got boat raced in Morgantown earlier in the week. So they had a little bit of a struggle there. And they're like a lot of these Big 12 teams towards the bottom. They are trying to make sure they solidify their spot in the NCAA tournament. A lot of these teams are in the tournament right now, like Oklahoma State and West Virginia. Tech is a team that, as we know, very famously on this show is on the bubble right now, and they're not in, but they're a part of the crew that is looking for a way to get in. You say they're not on the bubble, but for some reason I go and look at Joe Lenardi and he says next 4 out, Texas Tech.
That's outside
is
the bubble.
On the list.
That is outside the bubble.
No,
on the bubble is first 4 out.
No,
in the bubble,
that's not how that works.
Last 4 in.
No, that's not how that works. That is not how that works. The bubble is not just 4 teams. That's a pretty small bubble if we're talking about it, because it's pretty easy to pop bubbles. So
we're not
getting rise up that list again.
Yeah, I know. We're not doing it. I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I'm just
arguing
sticking up for Texas Tech here. Sticking up for Texas Tech here. They are in the bubble conversation. We'll see where they ultimately end up going. But anyways, K-State, Oklahoma State, that's what really matters as we look at what's coming up this weekend. Part of a pretty good slate of Big 12 games this weekend. Some solid ranked matchups in the conference. K-State obviously doesn't get a ranked opponent in Oklahoma State, but other games going on. Texas at Baylor is a big one. That's an 8-9 game. And then even though, I know we're not getting into this, but ranked TCU on the road at Texas Tech over this weekend. And we talked about Tech on Wednesday, how they have some opportunities coming up that they could realistically win their final 3 games of the regular season and change kind of the complexion of their season. KU's at home against West Virginia. We talked about that as well. West Virginia just isn't going to win in Lawrence. I think Bob Huggins has probably a pretty bad mindset when he goes there. Jerome Tang said to expect to win. I really do think Bob Huggins tells his team to expect to lose and get screwed over before they start that game. So you just can't have that. But those are the games of interest. I don't think anybody cares about Oklahoma, Iowa State tomorrow unless Oklahoma ends up winning that game, because then it's just kind of one of those where you point your fingers and laugh at Iowa State. So that's what the Big 12 slate looks like for our game that we'll have going on in Stillwater with a 1 o'clock tip on ESPNU. How do you expect the Wildcats to come out? Because I think the last 3 halves of basketball that they've played have been really good. And we've seen, obviously, the defense has gone to a new level recently for K-State, but we're also in a position where the offense seemed to have quite a bit of a punch on Tuesday. And that was even without Marquise Noel being in the mix. I'm buying time for Alec because he's taking care of his contacts right now. So fire away. Thoughts on the Cats and what you expect going into Stillwater tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know if my allergies are starting to get to me as March comes. That's normally what happens. And now I'm in a new state where you guys like to farm a lot here, like where I'm from. All right, yeah. So I actually am pretty excited for this game because I think it's an interesting matchup for K-State. It was obviously a pretty close game the last time these two teams played. K-State wins 65-57 in Manhattan, but that was kind of a time when K-State was kind of rolling. If you think back to it, they were really hot at that point. I think they had won. Let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 games in a row. Is that right? I don't know. I'm not a very good math person. But all things considered, I think it's a really good opportunity for K-State to get a good road win and potentially knock a team out of the tournament, maybe, or knock them outside of the bubble, because Oklahoma State's right now kind of flirting with that last 4 in, first 4 out kind of territory. But like we said earlier this week, I think Oklahoma State's a team that is kind of been playing weird basketball, lost their identity a little bit, where, we think of them as a really good defensive team. They're top 15 in the country in a lot of defensive metrics, particularly efficiency. rating, but they've lost their last 3 and they've given up at least 85 points in the last 3 games. So it's just kind of a weird situation right now for Oklahoma State. So I'm interested to see if they kind of figure out some things defensively against a K-State team that seems to have figured some things out offensively.
Yeah, Oklahoma State giving up 91 points a game over their last 3. Obviously, that's highlighted by the fact that TCU scored a 100 against them last Saturday. That's not something you anticipate because TCU, they don't do a lot of things to make you feel like 100 is attainable, especially when the 3-point shooting is what stands out to me there. TCU, typically not a great 3-point shooting team, and they shot well in the game against Oklahoma State, but they didn't take a lot of them. That was Oklahoma State doing it to themselves and making some errors there. I think that K-State goes in there with a very positive mindset. I think we've seen this little reset take place for them now where they're kind of back on track. And I wonder if we see K-State get back into a stage where they pick up some of the momentum that they had from earlier in the season that kind of helped carry them to quite a few wins to start Big 12 play, got them in position to be in a really good spot. Then ultimately things kind of fell apart on them relative to, the rest of the league and the league title race. But I think that this is going to be a good test for K-State because obviously the last 3 teams that have played Oklahoma State have kind of had their way with them. And it's going to be interesting to see how K-State is able to handle a guy like Caleb Boone inside because Boone was pretty successful the first time that he played K-State this year, put up 23 points in that game against K-State, and he's got some weird numbers this year. He had a stretch where he was on a tear, but he also has some really low scoring games, including the last 2. He only played 16 minutes over the last 2 games because he's been in foul trouble. So that's been a little bit tough. He fouled out in 6 minutes of play against West Virginia.
Is that good?
No, I don't know that that's good. It's impressive, and he plays hard. I'll give him credit for that. But that's really the wild card going into this. It's Caleb Boone and Bryce Thompson. You never know what you're going to get out of those 2 guys. Boone, you feel a little bit more confident if he stays on the floor. He's going to be able to take advantage of some teams inside and put up, anywhere from 15 to 25 points. Bryce Thompson is the one that if the shots are falling, then he's going to be on and he can go for 20 on you. But he's also going to have games where he just completely shoots Oklahoma State out of it. So I'm fascinated to see what Oklahoma State's offense looks like against this K-State defense that I thought defended really well against Baylor, was great in the second half against Iowa State. And really over the last, couple of weeks, the defense has been pretty good for K-State and is, I think, probably turning into one of their biggest assets as we move forward towards the month of March.
Yeah, if you look at some of their defensive efficiency numbers, they've been pretty much above average for all of their games. Dating back to Florida, they've only had 2 games which are pretty much average. That was the loss at Kansas and the loss at Oklahoma. Both of those games had DERs over 100. Usually you want to be under 100. But a lot of them are in the 80s, which is really, really good for K-State defensively. It peaks at 66 against Florida. And obviously remember Florida's inability to score in that game. Yeah. They only scored 50 points in that 60-54 K-State win over the Gators. But it's been really good of late. They were really good against Texas, especially in the first half. They were really good against, I thought Texas Tech. I thought they actually played pretty well defensively against Texas Tech. Oklahoma, I think that they allowed a lot of threes, but you kind of want to allow teams to take far shots. You don't want to allow teams to get a ton of layups. So I think that's one of the reasons why that one's higher. And so Oklahoma still only scored 79 or whatever. Oklahoma scored. Mm-hmm. So in the Oklahoma game, it was actually 108. Sorry. My eyes are still adjusting for the listeners. As you can see, if you're watching, I got up and put my glasses on. It's not a good morning for me over here in Manhattan. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, the defense has been better. I think yesterday Gabe told us that dating back to the Florida game, K-State's defensive efficiency ranks 3rd in the country, according to Bart Torvik. And I don't know if that's updated since last night, but that's actually really impressive. And that gives them a good opportunity against any Big 12 team. And really, I think any team in the country, because if you can guard, you're going to have a chance to win, especially when you've got 2 guys on the offensive end who you feel like you can probably count on to get you at least, 15 points each. Hopefully, as you kind of look at what Marquise Noel and Keontae Johnson average, obviously they're both over 16 points a game at this point in the season. So you hope that you're able to get at least 15 from the two of them. So when you get 30 points or so from two players and then you get really good defense, it allows you to play pretty well, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at some of the things that Oklahoma State is going to be able to maybe provide, to me the biggest wild card in all this is Musa Cisse. We didn't see him in Manhattan the first time. When he has played this year for Oklahoma State in conference play, the Cowboys are 7-4. When they have not had Musa Cisse, they are 0-4. They lose when he's not on the floor. Now he has been out there for their 3 straight losses that they've had, and he's played full minutes in those games, but he's been kind of a key factor to their success because he can help plug up the middle. Now, the one thing that benefits K-State, I think, is what we saw on Tuesday against Baylor. Early in the season, I don't know if you remember, but Gabe talked to the guy from Shot Quality, and he talked about how good K-State was at making cuts, and that was kind of what was propping them up. I think that's what we're seeing again. Is I thought the cutting by K-State was really good. Guys were working their way around and opening themselves up inside well enough, and if you can do that, it might make it tough for a guy like Cisse to keep up, and depending on what his length is going to be able to make up for. I think that's beneficial for K-State. And then we'll see kind of how everything else shapes up for him. Because looking around at kind of how things played out this over the last week for Oklahoma State. So against West Virginia, the Mountaineers shot 41% from 3 in that game. TCU, I mentioned, they don't shoot from 3 very well, but they were 53% in that game against Oklahoma State, and that was on 8 of 15 shooting, so that's pretty good for a team like them. And then when Kansas went there, KU was actually the worst three-point shooting team against O State in this 3-game losing streak. They were 36% and 8 of 22, but KU's kind of struggled from 3 over the last couple of games. So Oklahoma State is not defending the three-point line very well right now. It's a weakness that they have, especially since they're relying so much on Boone and Cisse to protect things inside. So I'm going to be interested to see if K-State can't establish early enough getting some things done inside. They're going to need a significant game from Johnson to hit a couple of threes, Noel to get back into shape, and then hopefully enough other guys can kind of slide in there, like maybe Ish Massoud can provide something. And then at that point, it's a wild card. Does Desi Sills make shots on Saturday? Does Cam Carter make shots on Saturday? The numbers would likely tell you no, that they will not, but there is always that possibility, especially if you're getting enough looks there. So I think offensively for K-State, I expect them to get some looks from 3, and hopefully they have a better performance there than what they had on Tuesday against Baylor, because they did not shoot it well from 3, despite still being able to win by double digits and pretty comfortable in the end over Baylor.
Yeah, I think the biggest key for this team as we kind of approach March, and as we look at what this team can ultimately accomplish in the NCAA tournament, it's going to be, do they have a third player emerge as a contributor consistently? When Cam Carter's been good, they've been really, really good. Look at the games that K-State's had against Texas, notably, obviously Baylor, notably. When they've had Desi Sills step up and score 24 points, they beat, in my opinion, what's going to be the number 1 overall seed, Kansas, and Bramlage. So when they've had a third scorer kind of emerge, when they've had a third contributor emerge on the offensive side, particularly in the backcourt, I think they become a really difficult team to defend. At this point, I think you just kind of know that you're not going to get much offensive production from David Gasson. You can't bank on much production offensively from Bebe Igiola, let alone, like, you don't really know how many minutes I think Bebe is going to give you. I think at this point you can bank on good energy and effort plays, which is a victory in of itself.
I think tomorrow is a game where we see, people were asking about it afterwards about Tyke Green and Bebe. I bet we see a little bit more of those guys tomorrow. And I actually think Bebe could have some service against Oklahoma State.
I disagree. I think Tang has gotten to a point where at this time in the season, you normally see rotation shrink because you want your best players on the floor at this time of the year. And in the NCAA tournament, it tends to shrink even more. Like, you can get away with playing 7 guys in the NCAA tournament, and you want your best players on the floor. And that's something that benefits Kansas State because they don't have a ton of great depth. Like, this is not a team, and this is an extreme example, but like Texas is a team that has incredible depth, right? Yeah. Like that roster has a ton of pieces that they can kind of slide in and out that come off of their bench. But like Kansas, for example, they're a team that doesn't have a lot of depth. And I think you kind of hear people talk a lot about one of the concerns that they have about Kansas looking at the NCAA tournament is like, well, they don't have a ton of depth. They don't have a ton of guys that come off the bench and score. Well, I would argue you don't need that. And I think a good example of that is last year's North Carolina team making it to the national title game, basically playing 6-7 guys most of the time. And I think that's something that benefits this Kansas State team as we look ahead to the NCAA tournament is that I think you're going to feel okay kind of removing Bebe Igiola from the rotation, maybe removing Tyke Green from the rotation, maybe getting less minutes for someone like David Gasson in the rotation, should that become something they decide to do. And I think that that's not necessarily a terrible thing for this team because I think you feel pretty good about their top 3-4. But at the same time, you definitely have concerns about some of the guys and some of their weaknesses coming off the bench. But now you're seeing, I think K-State and Jerome Tang really decide, hey, let's really play to our strengths. Let's put our best players on the floor. And at this time of the year, you often see coaches do that because you need your best players on the floor to win at this time of the year.
Yeah, I just think tomorrow, Oklahoma State, the brand for O State is that they're going to play a little bit more physical. Tyke Green has the body type to help out there. And if, I could foresee an issue where they need some help with somebody being active and a little bit more aggressive in going in and doing some things defensively or like rebounding and hustle wise. That's why I could see a role for him. So, I'm not expecting him to play like 20 minutes tomorrow, but I don't think it'll be zero. And I think for Bebe, David Gasson is the better player still, just because he can move better and there's a little bit more to his game. But I like what I've seen from Bebe Igiola more over the last however many games than I have Gasson. And the other thing that really concerns me about Gasson, like we knew he's never been a great free throw shooter, but he was 1 of 5 against Baylor on Tuesday night. And for the way that Tang wants these bigs to play, running to the rim and getting inside and getting those looks, like guys are going to hack at you. And so if you can't finish, which at times I don't think Gasson has been the best finisher, then you need to be able to make your free throws. And that can become a liability, especially in a game against Oklahoma State, to where if Oklahoma State plays the game that they want to play, like they're going to want to do this low scoring. And games that Oklahoma State has won in Big 12 play this year, the most points that they scored was 79 against TCU. And that game, they got up big at halftime and they barely hung on in the end. But everybody else, it's like in the 60s, low 70s is what they've scored into. So points could come at a premium tomorrow. And Bebe Igiola is going to step up and make his free throws most of the time. So I that's why I see probably a little bit more split time for Gasson and Igiola on Saturday. It may not happen, but I think that I would be at least interested in seeing him out there. And with the fact that Oklahoma State is going to have two pretty big bodies inside, I think that he could maybe handle Cisse a little bit more because he's not that much of an offensive threat unless you're just, a swinging gate down there. So we'll see. But those are my thoughts on what we may see personnel wise tomorrow. Just because, I'm with you. You want to have your best guys out there, and this isn't YMCA basketball. You don't need to be getting everybody minutes just because you pity them. But I do think that there could be a role that those guys serve tomorrow, especially if certain guys aren't coming through for you. Because at this point, like you got to do what you can to keep the momentum moving forward for K-State. Because now that you've won back-to-back games, even though this isn't an easy game by any stretch of the imagination, you're going on the road to Oklahoma State. You feel like you should win this game based off of how you played the last two. And so I think you got to put your best foot forward. And if somebody's not pulling their weight, have a quick trigger if you're Jerome Tang and make a switch.
I think it's one of those situations where, like, I felt like Bebe gave them really good energy. And I know they in the win over Iowa State, I thought he gave them good energy. I know they lost the game at Oklahoma, but I thought he played pretty well in that game. All things considered, played hard when a lot of other people on the team effectively did not. And I think the least people like to talk about, like coaches in particular, like to talk about toughness and the importance of effort. As a basketball observer and really observer of sports, and I don't know if you feel the same way here, like the very least I expect of an individual and a team as a whole is effort. Like go out like the very first thing you should do when you go out on the court is just play hard. If you play hard, like your floor as a player is much higher. Dive on the floor for loose balls, crash the glass, try and get deflections defensively, like all those kind of things. And I thought Bebe's been doing that more. And I just think that the Baylor matchup wasn't particularly a beneficial one for him. We saw Baylor on 3 straight possessions get an advantageous switch where one of their 3 guards was matched up with him at the top of the key. And I know Baylor didn't score on any of those 3 possessions, but I think we can all admit, like, if you keep doing that, Baylor's probably going to score some of those times. So I think that if Bebe's going to continue to give you good energy and to continue to give you really good effort coming off the bench, like maybe he does turn into someone that plays a little bit more or stays in the rotation, takes some of the minutes away from David Gasson. And I think that this time of the year is tough on coaches because they're trying to figure out what their rotation is going to be for the NCAA tournament. They're really trying to figure out who I can use and who I can't use in a close game because, everything's magnified in tournament play. So it's become really interesting, I think, for us to kind of look at this and view this from a lens of what does the front court look like? Who is inserted? Who is getting opportunities and who isn't getting opportunities? And I feel like lately we've kind of seen Tang kind of tinker with it a little bit with Tyke Green not playing the last couple games. David Gasson being moved out of the starting lineup. Like we're seeing him kind of work with different things in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be kind of interesting to watch tomorrow how Tang manages the rotations because Oklahoma State is kind of a different team than what they are accustomed to facing, and just because it's recent, we can go and take a look at it. I mean, it's a little bit different because we know that some of these teams, like this is just how they're built. But for the last 2 teams to play Oklahoma State, they've been more big heavy against Oklahoma State than they have been guard heavy. West Virginia is in a similar position. If you go and take a look at like the situation against them, and I know foul trouble dictated some of this, but like Joe Toussaint has been one of the better players off the bench in the Big 12 this year. He only played 11 minutes in the game against Oklahoma State, and the Mountaineers went big a majority of the time. Like they started 3 bigs, and 2 of their 4 highest minute getters off the bench were big guys. And I think that they know that they can throw more of those guys out there, and you have to against Oklahoma State because they have a rebounding advantage at times. So I think it's going to come down to David Gasson tomorrow. Like if he can go out there and provide enough of that spark and energy for K-State, then we probably won't need to see much or too much more of Bebe Ijiola. But I think like David Gasson is going to play the biggest role in him being on the floor tomorrow or not, and then how K-State is able to establish some things off of that. So, I mean, I look forward to seeing how Jerome Tang approaches this game because in the NCAA tournament, like you're going to face teams that have totally different styles than what you're accustomed to, where fortunately for K-State this year, there's really only been 2 teams in the Big 12 that have played kind of a totally different game than what you're used to, and that would be TCU and Oklahoma State. So this is a good kind of adjuster, and you can figure out how do we change things based off of a matchup and move forward with that because Oklahoma State, even though Cisse is going to get in and play a ton of minutes, they will start fairly small. And so K-State might be able to still do that tomorrow, or maybe they go out and they decide that they needed to make a change, and instead of Cam starting, maybe Gasson is back in there. Because I think at this point, I think Desi Sills is in the starting lineup, regardless of what happens. I think the way games have started the last 2, it's probably just best to have him out there. He can help handle the ball with Marquise Noel, and I think it's going to free up a few more things for Noel early in games. If you have a guy like Sills that, even though it's not consistent, he can get to the basket and he can create some things for himself. So you have to put a little bit more emphasis on what Desi Sills can do as opposed to Cam Carter, because Cam Carter is kind of like a magic 8-ball when he gets a look. Like, yes, no, maybe next time, whatever it might be. Desi gets the ball, like he can take it and do something in the moment. He can give you an immediate answer. Cam Carter, it's a little bit of like unsure, not knowing what's going on there. So I think that's why Desi might have solidified his spot in the starting lineup, whether K-State goes 2 or 3 guards moving forward.
Yeah, I think that Desi's going to start the rest of the year. And I expect Cam Carter to start too. I just don't really think that I don't think that they're going to change the starting lineup again at this point in the season. I just don't see it happening. And I was surprised they did it in the first place because I thought that moving Desi off of the bench and into the starting lineup really limited the type of production that they would get off of their bench. And it kind of has, if you really look at it. I mean, there's no one on K-State's bench that they can really rely on to score for them anymore. Not that you could rely on Desi to be, a double-digit scorer by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he's averaging 8.3 points a game, which is third or fourth on the team. It's fourth on the team behind Noel, Johnson, and Tomlin. But now you've got your leading scorer coming off the bench is averaging just 6.5 points. So I don't foresee them making another change to put Gassan back in the starting lineup and weaken their bench even more with Carter coming in off of the bench where Carter's averaging 6.3 points. Like, I guess it's a pretty even switch, but I don't know. I don't see them making that switch. Like, maybe you do it for matchup purposes if you play a team that's really big in the NCAA tournament, but I just don't see him doing it because I think a lot of people make too big of a deal, I guess, out of who starts and who doesn't start and who comes off the bench. Really, to me, it's who plays and who doesn't play. Mm-hmm. Like, who plays starters minutes, who doesn't play starters minutes. And for the longest stretch, like, we saw that Desi Sills was in the game more in the second half than Cam Carter was.
Yeah.
Like, a Desi, not to steal their term, because I think it's a term that gets thrown around way too much and it means nothing. The sixth starter thing, like, everyone uses that phrase for someone that they're confident in coming off of the bench. But, like, Desi was playing more than Cam was.
Mm-hmm.
I always consider Desi to be more important to this team than Cam was. Like, Desi's minutes percentage is over 71 and Cam's is under 65.
Yeah.
So, like, Desi plays significantly more minutes than Cam does.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I think a similar circumstance in all this that you can take a peek at would be somebody like your boy Sir'Jabari Rice. Like, he's going to play well over half the game when Texas needs him to, even though he's coming off the bench. Like, he honestly is going to probably end up as a guy that, even though he comes off the bench, he's probably going to be somebody that makes an all Big 12 team the way that he's played. And if you go and look at Texas, even just the last 3 games
of the year in the league, by the way.
Yeah, no, he is.
I don't even think it's close.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that you could say is that, like, he scores a lot. He doesn't do a whole lot else. But, like, numbers-wise, Desi's not going to stack up there.
3.5 rebounds. Like, that's pretty solid.
Yeah, but if you go and look at recently what's taken place, he hasn't – I mean, he had 5 rebounds 5 games ago against Kansas. He had 10 against K-State. But it's pretty volatile there. Desi doesn't put up this, like, numbers either. It's going to be Rice because he scores. But what I'm saying is, like, you go look at his numbers over the last 3 games, the Texas Tech game that Texas lost. So Rice ends up playing more minutes than 2 of the starters for Texas. Against Oklahoma, he ends up playing more minutes than 3 of the starters for Texas. And Iowa State, he ends up playing more minutes than 2 of the starters in that game as well. The only guys that consistently play more than him are Marcus Carr, makes sense, and then Tyrese Hunter and Timmy Allen. So he is essentially he plays starter minutes for that team, and that's where I think you can find that it doesn't matter.
I mean, he's
necessarily
the second leading scorer.
Because if you flipped out, like, those guys that are playing less minutes than him, like for the game against Iowa State, for example, Mitchell and Dessou only scored a combined 4 points. And so if you throw that on the bench, then Texas's bench has 18 points as opposed to what they ended up having was 34 in that game because Rice came off of it. So I'm with you. It really doesn't matter who starts outside of just like that opening stretch. I think it matters if you feel like you've been kicking yourself early in games. And also then if you feel like you can get an advantage, which is why I think having Desi out there is better for K-State right now, is because I do think that it hasn't necessarily worked yet, but I do think it opens them up for the possibility of Marquise Noel getting some better options and looks early in games. That if it just continued to be Noel, Carter, and then 3 forwards out there, he's probably not going to get, because when it's that situation, it's pretty easy for teams to look at K-State and say, all right, we got to put all of our focus on Noel and Johnson, and as long as we plug enough lanes up and help well enough, we don't have to worry about the other 3 guys killing us. I think that has started to change a little bit for K-State. And then obviously on Tuesday, we saw a total team effort where I thought everybody played really well for the Wildcats. So I don't know. That's more big picture stuff than Oklahoma State. But I think at this point, like, K-State's back in the position to where how they play is going to dictate whether they win or lose a game. It's not really going to be what the other team does. I especially expect that from a team against like Oklahoma State that doesn't always shoot the ball very well. They're 32% from 3 on the season. They're pretty reliant on what Caleb Boone is going to do. And then if Bryce Thompson can kind of have a bust out game. But Bryce Thompson is one of those guys that could go for 20 in the first half, and then he doesn't score again in the rest of the game. So they're just very volatile, and that's why if K-State goes out there, they're ready to play, they have the right mindset, they'll take care of business, which I'm sure is exactly what I said before they played Texas Tech and Oklahoma, and they obviously didn't have that. But I think having that in the back of their heads pretty freshly, that they did lay eggs in those games, that they'll be able to step up a little bit.
To go back to what you said about Desi being in starting lineup and it potentially opening more looks for Marquise, it should, on the idea that you have a better ball handler on the court instead of David Gasson, who isn't someone who's going to handle the basketball. So you can kind of space the floor that way. But what would really help Marquise Noel shooting is if this team had other people who could make shots consistently.
Yes.
Because quite frankly, outside of Keontae Johnson and Marquise Noel, no one on this team can make shots consistently. And
not only that, but like, yeah, and they're really the only two that can really create their own shot.
Yes, and I don't even know how much I can say like Marquise is going to consistently make 3-point shots given his recent struggles.
Yeah.
Because his 3-point percentage has fallen to 33.9%. So call it 34%. Mm-hmm. But, you know, if you kind of look at what he's done since the game at Kansas, when he shot 3 of 11 from the perimeter, he's shooting over the last 7 games from 3, 22%. And that's slightly inflated just a little bit by the 4 of 9 he had against Iowa State, which that don't take anything away from him. I think a lot of K-State fans probably saw the Iowa State game and was like, okay, Marquise's shooting stroke is back. But then he goes 0 of 6 against Baylor. So I don't even know how much you can count on Marquise to be a knockdown perimeter shooter at this point. What would help them all is if they could just start making shots. Now, you could say that about however many 353 Division I basketball teams there are in the country, how much better things look when they make shots.
The difference is for K-State is we know that they have 2 guys that can actually make the shots.
Bingo.
But the problem for K-State is also that if we know that they only have 2 guys that can make the shots, so do all the other teams that are playing them. Yes. Therefore, that's why like Noel's shooting numbers over the last however many games have been so much worse, because these other teams are well aware that there's really only one threat that they have to worry about, and that's Noel. Because if you can't get a shot off and then you make sure, okay, we're going to have 2 guys on Noel, or, you know, at least one guy, and then one guy's helping pretty hard. And then also we make sure that we have somebody stay right there with Keontae Johnson. This team is going to have to beat us by trying to get inside and finish, or lucking their way into other dudes making shots. And that's the tricky part for K-State. That's the only reason why, like, theoretically having Desi out there, you have to devote a little bit more intensity, I think, defensively towards him, just because he can drive. He'll be a little bit more aggressive. But again, like, at the end of the day, it really comes down to creating your own shot. And Noel and Johnson are the only 2 dudes that can do that. And until somebody else proves they can do that, K-State will be an easier team to defend than others. And that's why they're going to have to continue to get creative. And I don't know. I mean, probably take a team by surprise in the NCAA tournament that thinks they can get away with it a little bit, or you get lucky and you're facing an inferior team that can't keep up as well. But that's been the struggle for Noel shooting. Nobody else on this team can shoot. And like Ish Masood can come in there and he can knock down shots most of the time, but he's not doing it like the 50% pace that he was doing earlier in the season.
Yeah, he's only shooting 1.2 threes a game,
which we knew wouldn't last. But also, like, Ish has to get the ball kicked out to him and be ready to go and fire, as opposed to there's no threat for Ish Masood off the dribble to create his own shot. And that really limits K-State in some ways. And that's the thing moving forward for K-State and the staff that it is likely to change. Like we had the conversation a week or 2 weeks ago about how K-State wants to play like Baylor, and they're trying to. They just don't have the guards to do it like Baylor. And part of having the guards is not just, some of the insane skills that those guys have. It's really having just the one skill, and that's being able to be a great three-point shooter. Because K-State, I think there are times where they have the looks there. They just don't have the shooters to round it out. And that's going to be the biggest concern for K-State moving forward is if you get teams that can defend well and good enough, K-State's just going to have a tough time getting those shots to fall. But that's why the defense, will bring it back into everything and tie it in. That's why what the defense did on Tuesday against Baylor was so impressive. The Bears still shot almost 40% from three, and they didn't turn the ball over at some ungodly number. But K-State, who were they like 20% from three in the game against Baylor or somewhere worse than that, they still won the game by 10, and they still made things happen because their defense was better, and also they didn't turn the ball over themselves.
They were 4 of 21 from three against Baylor.
Okay, there you go. So what is that, 19%?
I don't do math.
Okay, well, I don't either. That'd be probably 19%, 18, 19%, something like that. The defense was good, and then Marquise Noel not turning the ball over was a big help. It was the first time in K-State history that anybody had 10 assists, no turnovers in a game.
I think it's 21% if I remember how to calculate a percentage.
Well, so they were 4 of 21.
So you just divide 4 by 21, right?
Yeah.
And then multiply by 100.
Let's see here.
Yeah, it's 21%.
I'm right. It's 19%.
Well, how'd you do that? Because I got 21%, but maybe it's because I didn't.
What number? What are you dividing by here?
Well, 4 divided by 21. Oh, wait, maybe I hit 4 divided by 21. This is great podcasting. I hit the wrong button, I think.
Okay, yeah, you had to, because 4
I got
of 20,
19%. I
4
think
of 20 is 20%, because that's 1 of 5. So
I don't know what button I hit, but I did it on my phone off to the side.
Dang.
Again, this was great.
Are you co-signing or what are you doing? Whatever
I don't
it
even know
is.
what that means, Mason.
I just remember signing.
That's
stuff from geometry.
What's in trigonometry? Is that what that is?
You have to use like sine and cosine for geometry, I thought, or maybe
I thought it was trig. I think you had to do that with trig when you've got like the unit circle.
Well, I'm sure you have to do it for a lot of other elements of math too. Nobody
Aren't
cares.
You happy
I don't
you
care
learned how to do all that stuff in high school and not like how to count do your own taxes.
Pretty pointless. I don't do my own taxes.
Well, I don't either. Speaking of which, I just sent my stuff in.
And people that do their own taxes don't even really do their own taxes. You just get on there and you use whatever service you want to use online, and like H&R Block or something. Shout out to H&R Block, who is a longtime sponsor of Power Cat Game Day for basketball season. So we would just
like their commercials. They're the ones with the green dot. Oh no, that's Fidelity.
It's a green square that H&R Block uses.
Yeah, who has the green arrow that like leads
Fidelity
people in the right?
It's Fidelity.
I kind of like their commercials.
So, well, that'll wind down the actual basketball talk of this. A couple of things to note. Alec and I talked about it before we got going here, and we'll have the full look at it. If you want, go to EMA Online and read Gabe Schwartz's piece on the comparable resumes that K-State has to other teams of NCAA tournaments past, and then also kind of a breakdown of examples of what good, bad, and average matchups would be for the Wildcats in March, because it's really fascinating stuff. And that's what the NCAA tournament comes down to for a lot of teams. It is, one, your talent. If you have a greater talent disparity than the other team, like you're much better than them, then obviously you have the leg up. But then from that point forward, it is matchups and kind of luck of the draw. Like K-State going to the Elite Eight in 2018 was luck of the draw. UMBC beat Virginia as a 16 seed in the first round. K-State got to play a 16 seed in the second round. Like K-State got lucky there. K-State still was good. They beat Kentucky. They deserve the Elite Eight berth that they got, and it should be respected. But they did get to play a 16 seed. They were fortunate for that in that second round. And so that's what it comes down to is your talent. And if your talent isn't much better than anybody else, matchup, luck, throw that all together. So go and take a look at it, because really what it does is shows you that the talent that K-State has and how they've put together their numbers from, a metric standpoint, it lines up with teams that had some issues in there because they just probably didn't have enough overall. So fascinating read. As K-State stands right now, we kind of assumed this after the win over Baylor. Baylor was still on the 2 line according to the committee last weekend. K-State was a 3. Well, K-State had the best week out of any of the 3s. They've won 2 games since then, including taking down Baylor. So the assumption was that K-State would probably move up to the 2 line. Probably the 2 easiest bracketologists to check, Jerry Palm of CBS and Joe Lunardi of ESPN. They both have K-State as 2 seeds now in Des Moines against 15-seeded Vermont. Both of them have that. That would be a rematch of my favorite K-State basketball game that I've ever attended. The 2007 NIT first round against Vermont. What an all-time game. Just an absolute dynamite of a game. For those that were there, you know how awesome it was. You'll enjoy this story, Alex. So I think this was probably during COVID because nothing else was going on. And we had Bob Huggins on our radio show in Manhattan. Bob Huggins was on the game with us, and we were talking. And so he was the coach for that NIT season. And we asked him about like stories about, him and Frank. And then also I was like, hey, this is probably weird. You may not remember anything from it, but my favorite K-State game ever was the NIT game against Vermont. Like, do you have anything you can tell us from that? And he kind of thought, and then he was like, well, actually, it was late in the game and K-State, they had a lead and then they let Vermont get kind of all the way back in it. And I need to go pull up the box score so I get the facts straight here. But he goes on to talk about how, they're late in the game and he's kind of looking for suggestions over on the bench. And Frank says to Bob Huggins, hey, I think we should get Cartier back into the game. Cartier Martin, my favorite Wildcat basketball player of all time. He says, I think we should get Cartier back in the game. And Huggins just stares at him and says, Frank, he fouled out 5 minutes ago. So Frank Martin wanted to put a guy that fouled out back into the game.
It's probably a good thought, though, on Frank Martin's.
Cartier
Martin was good from what I understand.
Yeah, if you want to get your leading scorer back into the game, it's probably a great move. Just he has to be available to be put back into the game. And so that's always something that sticks out to me. So I would love to see the Catamounts again. They tend to dominate the America East every single year. So that final score of the NIT game ended up being 59-57. Do you want to take any guesses percentage-wise what K-State shot at the free throw line in that game?
13.
Not that bad, but it was bad.
28.
A little bit higher, 36.8% from the free throw line, and they still won. They were also 27% from 3 in the game.
Why is this your favorite game? This is an eye bleeder.
Well, because here's the deal.
Who the hell enjoys a rock fight?
Here's the deal. I was in the 3rd grade, and my parents got me out of school early to go up to the game. It was this big deal. It was a lot of fun, and it came down to the wire. Like, I don't know that I had ever been. Game. I was in the 3rd grade. You don't know the difference when you're in the 3rd grade.
You knew the difference.
That's true, but also, like, keep in mind that in my lifetime, K-State had never been to the NCAA tournament. So, like, the NIT was kind of like that fun thing for me. It's like postseason basketball. And it's probably the first basketball game that I was at for K-State that like came down to the wire because I love my dad, did a lot of great things for my family. Still does. He's still alive. That maybe sounded weird. But he's not like, he would not go above and beyond in spending money to go to sporting events because he had 3 kids, so a family of 5 having to go to a game like got pretty expensive. So the only K-State basketball games that I really went to when I was a kid were like non-conference games against Kennesaw State. So I never was like at a game where it was close and came down to the wire. So K-State winning 59-57, that was fun to me. It still sticks out to me. It's one of those like core memories that I have. So I will forever be grateful to that. David Hoskins scored the game-winning basket with like 30 seconds left in the game. So there you go. That's a little K-State history for you right there. Serge Affeli got into the game as well, and I love Serge Affeli just because of his name. So
it's a good
there
name.
you have it. K-State history. One other, I guess, a couple other notes.
Serge Jabari. I think it's a great name.
Yeah, I know you love.
That's part of the reason why I like him. Plus, like, he has an awesome shot fake. I don't know how he learned that, but his shot fake's awesome.
A couple of other notes for K-State, and this is good news NCAA tournament wise. The winning that they have done, I think, almost guarantees that they are going to get some preferential treatment in regards to where they go for the NCAA tournament, first and second round. So whether it ends up being Des Moines or Denver, and then at the worst, Columbus at this point, that is a good thing because as of going into last weekend, a lot of people thought that they were going to be stuck going to Orlando. That would be miserable for many different reasons. One, it's one of the further trips that you would have to make. It would be crazy expensive for fans to have to go to because that would be spring break time for a lot of people. Going to the place that houses Disney World over spring break, probably not the cheapest endeavor. You know what? Come to think of it, that's probably why the best game I went to as a kid was an NIT game because my family was still financially recovering from my mom wanting to take us to Disney World. But it was
you're going to be going to Disney World soon.
No, I'm not.
You're going to be going to Disney World.
Not soon. I mean, the kid's not even born yet, and we got a ways to go before she would reach an age where she would understand Disney World.
I guarantee that you go to Disney World by 2028.
Oh, God, no. You shouldn't take kids to things that they're not going to understand or remember. That's just wasting your money. Like, I don't envision taking like a very young child to like a Royals game ever. Like, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't make any sense. But K-State in a position
your life still.
Yeah. Built-in babysitter, my wife. Just hang out at home. I'll go to the Royals game.
Watch it.
I don't want to get tigered here. That was a joke, people. Love my wife. She likes accompanying me to games. She doesn't enjoy the games, but she will go to games with me. So yeah, K-State's in a pretty good spot right now in terms of where they may end up. That's just important for, I don't know if it's as important for the team, but it's certainly important from the fan side of things, and get you some better matchups there.
Here's a question.
We'll see how
we can get out of here.
Okay. Yeah.
Would you rather your team be on 1 seed playing in New York City or a 2 seed playing in Oklahoma City?
Oh, 2 seed Oklahoma City. Easy.
I agree. I think I would rather be the 2 seed because I would want.
Yeah.
I would
no.
want.
Yeah. You take a seed line lower to go play somewhere pretty close to
Where
home.
your
I mean, that was
travel.
Yeah. I mean, only teams
unless you're like Kentucky or Duke or whatever.
Only like the teams that are the biggest of disappointments in college basketball lose as high seeds in places close to home. Like, I think of 2010, K-State went to Oklahoma City as a 2 seed, and they took care of business against North Texas and then BYU. Now, there was a team in 2010. I don't remember who it was, but they were a 1 seed, and they played close to home. They were also in Oklahoma City, but they lost to a team out of the Missouri Valley Conference. That's right. Kansas. They played close to home in 2010.
You really want to make fun of Kansas and their failures in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I didn't say I wasn't making fun of them for 2022. 2010. That is still one of the all-time. That is one of the all-time moments for anybody that was in Oklahoma City for that. You probably had the best night of your life. Like K-State moves to the Sweet 16, and before K-State did it, you got to sit there and watch Ali Farouk-Manesh and John Agleseder beat Kansas. What a time to be alive. And Ben Jacobson's turned it into an entire career at Northern Iowa because he just kept camping out there. You take a seed or two lower to go to a place that's going to fit you very well. That's probably how I view it. Like, for example, I mean, I guess maybe it would still work out this way, but if things change enough to where, I guess I don't know, because there's enough diversity there. But like, if somebody shifted around like Texas or somebody moved up to a one line and other spots were taken, I can guarantee you Texas would say, hey, we're cool with being a 2 and going somewhere else at this moment. But I don't think the Big 12 is going to have to worry about that. I think their top teams are pretty much locked into spots that are going to geographically make sense for them at this point in time. Because the only concern would end up being, like, if K-State was going to be in that 4 range, it was going to be a matter of who was going to be the better 4 seed and who gets kind of the bump. And then if you're on the outside looking in and all the other good spots are already taken, then you're kind of out of luck. And that's the benefit of what they did to Baylor, like flipping spots with Baylor. Now Baylor, a team that's, like an hour and a half south of Dallas, they're the team that's projected to go to Orlando now, as opposed to K-State, who gets to go to Des Moines, which is much more accessible for them. So I think that's all a good sign. One final thing regards tomorrow. You can save it for your preview and pick tonight if you want to. Ken Pom has Oklahoma State as a 70-69 winner in the game for tomorrow between the two sides. You think K-State gets the win? You don't have to tell me how it's done or what the score is, but do you think K-State gets the job done?
I haven't decided yet.
Okay. That's fair. Just going to have to read the preview and pick from Alec tonight, this afternoon, whenever it comes out. We'll be there. We'll have full coverage with everything that goes on. Just because I'm trying to keep a winning streak alive, I think I'm going to pick Oklahoma State again. I've picked Iowa State and Baylor the last 2 games. Good things have happened for the Cats. I don't want to be the guy that ends the good mojo for them. So put the chip on your shoulder, boys. I'm taking the Cowboys to win tomorrow for the greater good of Manhattan, Kansas, in the K-State community. But that'll do it for Alec and I. Go get subscribed over at EMA Online if you're not. And be sure to also subscribe to the EMA Online YouTube page, where not only do we upload all of our podcasts there, but we also have press conferences as soon as they finish up after games up, and then the video fast break and other video content that'll pop up from time to time. So be sure to get subscribed everywhere you can to keep up with us at EMA Online. And we'll have a little bit of action for you tomorrow from Stillwater, Oklahoma, as the Cats and Cowboys do their second battle.